Welcome into episode 5 of the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things college basketball, WNBA, and oh, so much more. I am Mia O'Brien, joined as I am each and every week by the one and only Mitchell Northam. Mitch, I said it to you as we got ready to start recording. It finally feels like, with Feast Week upon us, with top 10 matchups to discuss, the women's college basketball season, it is finally here, folks.
Yeah, we saw some good teams take some L's. We saw some good teams get some W's. We had some unexpected results. And yeah, we're having fun. It's mid-November. Season's getting real now.
As we do each and every week, let's begin with our Her of the Week nominees. I will kick us off, Mitch. My Her of the Week comes from the mid-major ranks. Maya McDermott was a massive part of Northern Iowa's 87-75. Yep, there's already an Iowa connection, folks. 87-75 win over the then 8th-ranked Iowa State Cyclones. She dropped 37 in this one. Shout out to somebody who I covered once upon a time in Caba Lauby, her running mate. She dropped 21 in the victory up in Cedar Falls. A massive win for Tanya Warren's squad. And after a narrow win over Drake, something tells me things aren't exactly as peachy for Audie Crooks and Bill Fenley as many believed out there in Ames, Iowa right now.
Yeah, Crooks and Iowa State bounced back later in the week. But, when I work with Mel Greenberg to help determine the USBWA weekly awards for women's basketball. And when Maya McDermott dropped 37 on Iowa State and win, we were like, okay, she's a lock. We can pencil that spot away, for later in the week. She's actually the nation's leading scorer right now with 28.7 points per game, which is wild. Shout out to Northern Iowa. She's also shooting 50% from three-point land to start the year. Northern Iowa plays against Auburn on Thursday, and that's a game to watch. Let's see if Maya McDermott can do it again and keep this thing rolling.
Yeah, let's see if Maya and the Panthers can also give Drake a run for their money. It has been an absolute dominant run for the Bulldogs for the better part of the last 6-7 years through the Valley, even with Jenny Baranczyk leaving for Oklahoma. And so credit to Tanya Warren and the squad. A lot of girls, including Emerson Green, whose brother now plays for the Milwaukee Bucks, if you're familiar with AJ Green. And, of course, their dad, a longtime coach in the Iowa area. A lot of girls that I covered at the high school level are certainly doing big things at that other university in Iowa that perhaps we don't talk about as much, with the other three getting so much play. More importantly, Mitch, I would like to credit myself that I wrote this down. I wrote down Maya McDermott as my Her of the Week, not realizing you gave her of the Week honors elsewhere already this week.
Yeah, she was definitely like a lock right away when we saw, that box score and that they beat Iowa State. I think it was the first time that Northern Iowa beat an AP ranked top 10 team. So yeah, shout out to them. That was awesome to see. And yeah, I love the college football connections that we somehow get on this show every week. We talked about like Chad Greenway last week, AJ Green this week. Keep them coming. We're good.
It's if you ask my family or my boyfriend, they will tell you it's just because it's Iowa, and it's the ultimate 6 degrees of separation state, if there is one in the nation. But yeah, I think I also want to credit Bill Fenley and the Iowa State squad, and I want to credit those female programs in the state of Iowa. And I think this kind of is a great way to transition into our starting 5 this week, because on the men's side in the state of Iowa, they don't travel. They don't play home and homes when it comes to those interstate battles. Iowa and Iowa State will play a home and home non-conference game, and that'll alternate between Ames and Iowa City each year. But they had to create an event where there was a neutral site event for Northern Iowa and Drake to play Iowa and Iowa State, because the men's coaches were not as keen on traveling and potentially getting knocked off at the site of a mid-major. And Bill Fenley brought it up in the post game. He was like, look, we didn't play well enough tonight, but I'll tell you this, at least we're coming here and we're having this game, because they are not doing so on the men's side.
Yeah, and Northern Iowa and Drake, by the way, have both shown over the years that you can get got when you come into their building.
There was a lot of getting got in the mid-majors and the MTE scene here this week. That's, of course, stands for multi-team event. Let's kick off this week's starting 5, which is a rundown of our biggest games and characters from the week that was in women's basketball. Mitch, with your AP poll reaction, UCLA is number 1 for the first time in their program history, and South Carolina is not.
Yeah, so UCLA, they are the 26th different school to hold the number one spot since the poll began in the 1976-77 season. The Bruins have never been number one before, and they are deservedly in that spot, I think, this week, despite I did not give them my number one vote. I actually voted for Notre Dame for number one. And I was one of three people who did that. UConn also got 9 number one votes, and UCLA got 20. I think you could, either one of those teams, no real argument from me, which is the number one team. In my opinion, I thought Notre Dame's win at USC by double digits was kind of the more impressive accomplishment. But yeah, UCLA just rolling South Carolina, quite frankly, which we'll get into that game a little bit later. But South Carolina falls to number 4. They had been number one for 23 straight weeks and 61 out of the last 62 weeks. I think the other notable thing about the poll this week is the Iowa Hawkeyes are ranked. They're in it. They're at number 22, which I've been ranking them all season. And
the rumors of their demise greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, Baylor falls out, so Iowa replaces them in the poll. And we got some other movement, elsewhere. USC falling 3 spots, Notre Dame jumping up 3 spots, Texas falling a spot, Oklahoma, Kansas State jumping up a spot. But I mean, earlier today, we're going to even have more shakeup in the poll next week, because after the poll came out today, which is Monday that we're recording this, Duke beat Kansas State quite comfortably, I think by double digits. So there's going to be some shakeup there as well. And parity, competitiveness, women's college basketball, a lot of good teams this year. It looks pretty wide open right now. I don't think there's like a singular runaway favorite at the moment.
So I'm going to call an audible in this week's starting 5. My number 2 of 5 is Indiana's demise, also greatly exaggerated, although certainly today's results after I put this rundown together did not exactly aid my case for that, as they lost by 30 to North Carolina. I want to circle back to Indiana, though, because the reason Baylor dropped out of the top 25 is, of course, because they lost to the Hoosiers. We'll circle back to Indiana. Let's not bury the lead, Mitch. Let's stick with the 2 marquee games of the weekend, and especially because your number 3 in this week's starting 5 is exactly what I would have said as well, which is there is no question, folks, Olivia Miles is back, and Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo are the best backcourt in college basketball right now.
Yeah, I wrote about this at USA Today's For the Win over the weekend. Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo, everybody talked about coming into the season. That was kind of the big question. Can these 2 ball-dominant guards play together? Miles kind of had the reins of the Irish 2 years ago. She sits out all last season with that knee injury, and Hannah Hidalgo just comes in and runs away with it and becomes a star in the sport. And can they play together? What's going on? I even asked Olivia Miles about this last March when I saw her at the Sweet 16. She was practicing fully by then. She was basically emulating the best player, whoever that week it was that Notre Dame was going to be playing. So some weeks she was Georgia Amor, some weeks she was Deja Kelly, whatever it was. And I think this game was the one that kind of silenced the doubters. Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles can play with each other, and not only can they play with each other, but they are probably the best backcourt duo in the country. I got this stat from ESPN's Alexa Philippou, who does a great job. Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles are the second pair of teammates in the last 25 years to have 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists each in a game against an AP top 10 opponent. The only other 2 to do that in that time period are Candace Parker and Alexis Hornbuckle for the Tennessee Volunteers in 2007. So pretty great company as the Irish just run all over the Trojans in Los Angeles on Saturday.
Final score, 74-61. The Irish go in to the Galen Center and pick up a massive win. Let's look at the other side of this game, though, Mitch, which is, did we perhaps have too high of a ceiling for a USC team whose depth was truly put to the test on Saturday? And was it too much for Juju Watkins to overcome a team in Notre Dame who 1 through 5, I know they've been banged up at different points throughout the better part of the last 2 months, but 1 through 5, I would argue there is much greater depth there, even with Kiki Arafan and Juju Watkins on USC's roster.
Yeah, the numbers that really stood out for me from this loss for USC was, they shot 1 of 13 from 3-point land. You can't do that against a team like Notre Dame. Kiki Iriafen, who you mentioned, shot 5 of 15 from the floor. That has to be better if you want her to be like a real, duo or even a Robin to Juju Watkins as Batman. The other thing was, 6 points for Rhea Marshall. And I just thought, against this Notre Dame team in its current form with the injuries and stuff that the Irish are dealing with, they don't have a lot of depth in the front court. So I kind of feel like USC should have made more of an effort to attack inside with Rhea Marshall. And then, 10 of 25 shooting from Juju Watkins. Is Juju a star? Yes. Can she carry a team? Absolutely yes. But I don't think you're going to be able to beat teams like Notre Dame consistently if USC just turns into the Juju show. They also had 21 turnovers, and 17 of those were steals by Notre Dame. So, the Irish really getting after it on defense, and USC just didn't take care of the ball. I still think they have the potential to get to a Final Four, and then anything can happen once you get to that stage. But I think with some of the new faces, Kiki Iriafen being one of them, they have some things to figure out over these next couple games.
I think it gives somebody. I'm going to make sure left for my right's difficult. There we go. This way.
You got it.
Yeah. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see. For those of you listening on podcast, this is awesome radio right now. I'm pointing at Caitlin Clark behind me. I think it helps us remember when we see Juju Watkins go 10 of 25, how difficult it is to literally drag a group of 2 and 3 stars, elevate their game the way that Caitlin Clark did for Iowa last year, especially. I think having Monica Sinano created a different sort of dynamic 2 seasons ago. But in the same vein, and yes, I'm going to make the comparison, in the same vein as Patrick Mahomes and what he is doing for the Kansas City Chiefs right now and dragging them to a 10-1 record despite all their other shortcomings. That's what Caitlin Clark did last year for Iowa. It will be impressive if Juju can do it. And certainly having Kiki as a running mate helps. But I also think that when you look across the city of Angels in Los Angeles and you see the depth and the true potential, because we've talked about Kiki Rice at length on this program, the true potential for a Batman and Robin scenario with Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice. And I think there's a couple other players on that UCLA roster that are making a argument that they really are Robin, they really are Batman, not Lauren Betts, not Kiki Rice. Well, it is Lauren Betts. Lauren Betts is in the duo somehow, some way. Point being, USC is going to have to face them twice this year. Good luck with that, because much like Notre Dame, this is not a sport where you can have one player single-handedly drag a team to a Final Four outside of perhaps the most generational player we've seen in the better part of the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah. And, when you talk about Caitlin, like, she did have other players alongside her that stepped up, in certain moments along the way, whether you talk about Monica Sinano, 2 years ago, or Hannah Stalkey in spurts last year, or Kate Martin or whoever. You need the pieces around you to step up. Another player I was just thinking about was, those Oregon teams with Sabrina Ionescu. She had other players who stepped up around her. She was the star, but you need that help sometimes. And so, I think that's what USC has to figure out in terms of the chemistry and just sort of getting those other pieces to step up consistently.
We'll circle back to UCLA and their absolutely dominant 77-62 win over South Carolina. But first, let's finish this week's starting five, Mitch. A brief foray into the WNBA. This happened after we finished recording last week. Lynn Roberts leaving Utah for the Los Angeles Sparks. This is the second college coach to head to the pro ranks that we have seen in this WNBA coaching carousel cycle. Surprised that Lynn was the one who was plucked by the Sparks? Or are you more surprised at the rumors that because Paige Beckers could want to go hang out with Lynn in LA, she could be saying no to the Dallas Wings and their plans to draft her first overall in the upcoming WNBA draft?
Yeah, I think Lynn is a great fit for the Los Angeles Sparks. The way that she, a little bit like Carl Smesko, not quite to that extreme, but, really emphasizes the three-pointer and that sort of thing. I'm curious to see what happens with Paige in the draft. Like, is her camp going to pull in Eli Manning and say that they're not going to go to
Sounds like
Dallas.
she'll play with Lynn. She wants to play in LA, it sounds like.
Right. But Dallas holds the cards. They have the number one pick. So are they going to engineer a trade, are they going to be able to get like a big bounty from LA for them to move up? That is super interesting to me as well. The thing that I really took away from the Lynn Roberts hire and the Carl Smesko hire too, that we talked about last week, I think that both of them going to the WNBA, I saw this take a couple times online. I think it has very little to do with like the sky is falling, what's wrong with college athletics thing that everybody works themselves up into every time we have something like this, or Tony Bennett retires, or a college football coach takes a gig in the NFL. The sport is fine. College sports is changing, but it's fine. I think this has more to do with the WNBA finally getting real about what it takes financially to get good college coaches to come to the W. Roberts was the 7th highest paid coach in the Pac-12 last year, making north of $700,000 annually, and she had a buyout of nearly $3 million. Smesko was the 3rd highest paid coach in the mid-major ranks and had a buyout of nearly $2 million. I had 2 good sources telling me that both of them got significant raises. So I think this is much more to do with the W getting some religion about, if we want good coaches, we got to pay up.
And I do want to shout out Lynn for, if nothing else, being able to adapt. And that's what I think is to her personnel, which I think is going to be fascinating to see, depending on where that Sparks roster shakes out for 2025. Because, of course, she most notably coached Alyssa Peely, who is, while certainly a threat from beyond the arc, she is not your traditional three-point specialist per se that Carl Smesko maybe was coaching down there at Florida Gulf Coast. And so I think that what will be interesting to see is, does Lynn opt for more of that inside-outside play? Whereas in Atlanta, we said on last week's show, we expect Carl Smesko to bring that three-point shooting prowess and three-point shooting above all else to the Atlanta Dream.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what Lynn does with Cameron Brink once she's healthy and back on the court. Especially someone like her who is familiar with her game, having faced again, game planned for her in the Pac-12 for many years.
All right, let's round out this week's starting 5 before we get back to the biggest games of the week. 2 characters that you have earmarked, Mitch, that you believe should not only deserve starting 5 recognition on this week's episode, but are names to follow in college basketball this fall or winter.
Yeah. Here in the Triangle in North Carolina, Toby Fournier at Duke and Lainey Grant at North Carolina. I think these are the 2 who have next for women's college basketball.
Driving the bus, I believe, is what you used the analogy last week.
Yeah. They both showed in the past week that the future is bright for the Blue Devils and the Tar Heels. They both had breakout games. Fournier had 25 points, 6 boards, and 3 blocks in a home win over a pretty good Belmont team. And Grant, who again is just 17 years old, started to kind of look like that bus driver that I was talking about that UNC might need against Ball State. She came off the bench and had 15 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. Fournier didn't play all that well on Monday against Kansas State, but they didn't need her to because Duke wins 73-62 behind a 30-piece from Ashlyn Jackson and some really solid team defense. But I think as this rivalry evolves over the next 4 years, you're going to see a lot of Toby Fournier and Lainey Grant highlights, and them 2 going back and forth with each other over the next couple of years is going to be really exciting to watch here in the Triangle.
Lainey Grant with 5 points in 16 minutes off the bench today in North Carolina, 69-39 win over the Indiana Hoosiers on this Monday as we record this podcast. Of course, it'll be dropping a little bit later in the week. And I think that North Carolina's growth is something we've talked about before, this idea of how many players did they lose in the transfer portal, and can they count on these young high school traditional recruits to come in and step up to the plate for the Heels?
Yeah, they I think showed some really good response over these past 3 games in the battle for Atlantis. They win that MTE after that loss to UConn. They beat Ball State, Villanova, and Indiana, who frankly all 3 are teams that could be names we hear on Selection Sunday. All 3 of those teams could find their way into the NCAA tournament. I thought Alyssa Utsby stepped up when she needed to. Really, the takeaway for me was Trayana Crisp, who was kind of an underrated transfer portal pickup from them from Arizona State. She provides something to this team that they frankly didn't have last year, which is consistent playmaking off the bench from a 2 guard. They just did not have that last year. And she comes into the game and provides a spark. She makes the all-tournament team for the Battle of Atlantis. And, the Tar Heels look pretty good right now after those 3 straight W's after losing to UConn and Greensboro.
All right, we got our her of the week, check. Our starting 5, check. We already touched upon Saturday's marquee matchup with Notre Dame defeating USC in LA, check. Let's hit the other marquee matchup of the weekend. We alluded to it earlier. Final score, UCLA 77, Mitch, South Carolina 62. It is the first road game in the regular season that Dawn Staley's Gamecocks have lost since 2019. It is the first time they have lost since the 2023 Final Four. What a matchup. What a game. Although, to be quite honest, I'm not going to lie, Mitch. I don't even want to use the phrase what a game because UCLA, quite frankly, just looked like they wanted this game more from the jump. And yes, a lot will be made of the front court for South Carolina, the idea of them not having this alpha 5 in their lineup. But I think more should be made of the energy and the effort that UCLA and Corey Close's squad showed from start to finish at the Pauley Pavilion.
Yeah, like you said, it wasn't a game. UCLA jumped out to a big lead early and didn't relinquish it. South Carolina didn't get within single digits of the lead in the second half. This was a beatdown. They got smacked, quite frankly, and we don't see that happen to South Carolina pretty much ever, even when they have lost in the past couple of years. This loss to UCLA was South Carolina's biggest margin of defeat since the 2019 Sweet 16, when they lost by 25 to Baylor, the eventual national champions that year, in Greensboro. And since then, Dawn Staley's Gamecocks have been rolling. But yeah, like you said, I think this game says more to me about what UCLA is and can be than it is about kind of South Carolina's problems and stuff like that. I think South Carolina will get things sorted out and they'll be back on track, here soon. But for UCLA, this is sort of what you and I talked about when it came to Lauren Betts. She didn't put up 30 this game, but she had a double-double of 11 points and 14 rebounds, plus 4 assists and 4 blocks against a really great team, the defending national champs. She stepped up and led with her presence on the court, her defense, her playmaking ability for others. I think UCLA has the pieces around her as the centerpiece and the star to really make a run. They had a total of 5 other players scoring double figures, and that was a group that didn't include Tamia Gardner or Janiah Barker, who both can fill up the stat sheet, when asked to and when given the opportunity to. For UCLA, I think this was their announcement that, hey, we're a contender for the national title and you should consider us as that.
5 players in double figures for the Bruins. I still have reservations on who the Robin is, if Lauren Betts is to be Batman or vice versa. I think certainly an argument was made by London Jones. I think that Jaime Jaquez's younger sister, Gabriella, certainly made a little bit of an argument, which she dropped 11, Jones dropped 15. For me, my question, and I don't want to be pessimistic about this UCLA squad because I do think they are a top 5 unit. But Mitch, I got to see them play from behind. It felt like there were multiple moments in this game where Kiki Rice looked at Corey Close, even when she was subbed out in the final minute, and she just had this look of I cannot stop. We need to just keep going. We need to keep going. If adversity had confronted that UCLA team, how would they respond? And look, they need to be celebrated right now. Like we said, this was a beatdown. They dominated South Carolina from the tip to the final whistle. But at the same time, I don't want to say it's the damn ESPN behind the scenes story, but there's just this gnawing in the back of my mind after seeing the behind the scenes of this group last year. And granted, they were without Lauren Betts for part of the year. That questions, are they front runners?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And I don't know if we'll know the answer to that really for a while. I'm looking at their schedule and they're going to play UT Martin and Fresno State and Hawaii and Washington and Long Beach State and Cal Poly. And then at the end of December, they'll play Creighton and Nebraska and Michigan and Indiana. So I think that's a 4-game stretch where we'll learn more about UCLA when it gets to that point. And it might not be a situation with the Bruins where it's a Batman and Robin thing with Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice. It might be a thing where Lauren Betts is Superman and she has a bunch of super friends around her. I think there's definitely more to learn from UCLA, and I think UCLA has more to prove for sure.
I do think that we will learn something or two when they make that trip to the Midwest, because man, oh man, what a weird series between the women's and the men's side between Creighton and Nebraska. We'll get to that in just a second. I do want to touch upon the South Carolina piece of this loss. At one point, Tessa Johnson stepped to the line and I saw she had 13 points. And Mitch, I literally couldn't believe it. I'm like, is she the only one who scored? She was not. There were actually a couple players who did score. In fact, they had two players in double figures in the 77-62 loss. South Carolina has to regroup, and they have to face that Iowa State squad that we already talked about that played with fire against Drake this weekend, and they also lost to Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls. I would think that's an Iowa State team coming out with something to prove. But man, oh man, would I not want to be them and having to face a South Carolina team that is going to be, quite frankly, angry after this result from Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, for South Carolina, I've been saying it all off season and in our first couple of podcasts, it's kind of like, what happens when this team faces a dominant center? And so, like we just saw it with Lauren Betts, they're about to face Audi Crooks, who is not a traditional center, but certainly someone who can score down low and bang. And they're going to face other really good centers this year. South Carolina has always had one, whether it's been Elena Coates or Asia Wilson or Leah Boston or Camila Cardoso. That player ain't on the roster this year. The Gamecocks got outscored in the paint in this game, 26-18, and they got out-rebounded, 41-34. South Carolina's already been out-rebounded twice this season in 6 games. All last season, 38 games or whatever, they got out-rebounded a total of 2 times at UNC in the regular season and in the SEC title game and it's against LSU. They won both of those games, but they were really close, and I think that speaks to how important the inside game and the rebounding is for South Carolina. The other number that jumped out to me for the Gamecocks was they scored 1 point on fast breaks. And like that figure combined with the rebounding total and the points in the paint, that's not South Carolina basketball, at least the South Carolina basketball that we've grown accustomed to under Dawn Staley. So I kind of wonder if we see a change in how this team attacks or a lineup shuffle. You mentioned Tessa Johnson, Tahina Pau also stepped up. Do you lean into the guard play and put the ball in their hands more and start shooting more 3-pointers? Do you start Tessa over Raven Johnson, which to me is something that should be considered? Like Raven is supposed to be this veteran and her game highs so far this season are 7 points and 3 assists, and she's shooting 20% from the floor. You need more from Raven Johnson. And then there's the thing with Malaysia Fulwiley. She only played 3 minutes. I'm not sure what's going on there. It seemed to me like she got benched, and it's not the first time that's happened. So they certainly have some things to figure out, but I think they have enough talent and a great coach, obviously, and enough time to get that done. I think it's just worth watching, like, how this team shifts and shapes and evolves over the next couple of games.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key word, is the shifting, the shaping, the evolving. If they were to lean more into their guards, they're going to have to up the pace of play. This is not an offense that can operate in a half-court set because they don't have that true back-to-the-basket center. And so I think you'll have to see a Dawn Staley team that looks way different than the national champions in 24, 22, and 17. I alluded to it earlier. Weird things are happening in Lincoln and Omaha, somewhere in Middle America. Final score in this one, Creighton 80, number 21, Nebraska 74. Maybe not so much of a surprise for us, Mitch, because I know I was very high on Creighton. I believe we both had them finishing in second in the Big East. But then on the men's side, to see a Creighton team that has right now one of the front runners for Player of the Year nationally, and Ryan Kalkbrenner and Fred Hoiberg and the Huskers just straight up punked Creighton at their own place. What is going on out there along the banks of the Missouri River?
I'm not sure, but both of those games were really fun, especially the women's one. Creighton 80, Nebraska 74. That was a game where Lauren Jensen just kind of took over. 31 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds, 10 of 19 from the floor, a couple 3-pointers. And Alexis Murkowski on the other side, like trying to kind of match her shot for shot. She finishes with 26. Man, I kind of wish they were in the same conference because I'd like to see this game again. But yeah, Nebraska and Creighton, they're both going to be names that we hear on Selection Sunday, and maybe we'll get that second matchup in the NCAA tournament. How fun would that be?
No, heck of a lot of fun. I think part of it too for Nebraska, and we'll see this throughout Big Ten play. They were 5 of 17 from beyond the arc. The reason they upset Iowa last year was because of not only their fortitude in the final 5-6 minutes of regulation and the fact that they were able to overcome a fourth quarter deficit, but also the 3-point shooting prowess for Amy Williams' squad. And so I think that's going to be really important, and that's why we may have some highs and some lows when it comes to the Huskers in 2025.
Yeah, they only made 5 while Creighton 13 of 29. So usually when the 3-point shooting is that lopsided, the team on the positive side gets the W.
2 more teams I want to hit from the week that was before we look ahead to what's to come with the Chef's Table Thanksgiving edition. Oh yeah, folks, you're going to want to stick around for this one. I do want to talk about Indiana, who we referenced in our starting 5, and North Carolina, who I know we kind of already went a little bit more in depth on. Talk about a strange season thus far for that squad of Hoosiers. We talked about it last week, Mitch. They lose at Assembly Hall to a mid-major team, because we're going to call them mid-major for the sake of calling them mid-major, in Harvard. And then they bounce back. They bounce Baylor from the top 25 by virtue of an upset victory last week. They lose by 30 this past week against North Carolina. They also lost to Butler. Help me make sense of Indiana, especially after that 30-point loss to the Heels on Monday.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be one of these seasons for Indiana. I think it's going to be an up and down season. I think they showed their potential. You talked about that win over Baylor. They also beat Stanford by double digits. They beat a good Ivy League team in Columbia. But I think right now a team of North Carolina is ahead of them, evidenced by what we saw on the court on Monday. But I still think Indiana is probably an NCAA tournament team, but probably not one who is in position to host as a top 16 seed, which they've been the past couple of years. I think that's where the Tar Heels very much want to be. In this game on Monday afternoon down in Atlantis, Indiana just couldn't make a shot. They shot 16 of 55 from the floor. That's 29% clip. And 4 of 26 from 3-point land. And then they missed 2 free throws, which, whatever in a 30-point game. But, the Tar Heels just smothered them on defense. So they got to figure some things out as it comes to, shooting and shooting mechanics. And, they still have like some veteran players on this team who can make shots. When you talk about Yarden Garzon and Chloe Moore McNeil, they have some players who can shoot. It just needs to come much more consistently than it did against North Carolina.
Yeah, which of us idiot co-hosts sat here and said, yeah, with Chloe Moore McNeil and all the wings that they have, it's going to be fine. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's just the nature of what it's going to be at Indiana.
Yeah. The next big game for them that I'm looking at on December 7th, I guess this is their Big Ten opener at Penn State. Who is undefeated right now and 7-0. So that'll be a big one for the Hoosiers, just to kind of see where they're at 2 games after playing the Tar Heels.
That's one game to watch in the next 2 weeks ahead. Let's look at our games to watch for this next week, Mitch. We call it Chef's Table. Traditionally, we have an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert for you to look forward to in the world of women's basketball. I'm going to shift things up a little bit with the Thanksgiving holiday ahead. We did this on my daily radio program, Helmets and Heels, last week. We're going to do it again on Wednesday. I'm going to ask you for a turkey, a side dish, and a pie for this week in women's basketball. So turkey, ham, that's your main event. That's your main entree. Your side, potatoes, veggies if you want. You can take that however you want to take it, Mitch. And then finally, a pie. And of course, be sure to let us know what type of pie you are serving at this week's table.
Okay. So I'm a turkey guy. So this is going to be our turkey. This is the big matchup this week that we actually just kind of talked about. We talked about both of these teams. Number 4, South Carolina. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Not number 1, South Carolina. Number 4, South Carolina. Playing against number 15, Iowa State in the Fort Myers tip-off. This is Thursday. 1:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox. So this is something that like you can put on after if you're a family or a group of friends who eats Thanksgiving at like lunchtime, when you get done, you just flip on Fox and, watch South Carolina, Iowa State, watch the Gamecocks go battle Audie Crooks.
Or as
down at
I've
Fort
told
Myers.
several people, Mitch, once the Lions go up by about 20 on the Bears, sorry, love you Bears fans. Once that happens, and because that the matchup of Cooper Rush and Tommy DeVito at 4:00 Eastern is just going to be so exciting that you're going to need to just watch a recorded version of it later. Your window of opportunity will open to watch this turkey of a game.
Cooper Rush and Tommy DeVito, that sounds like nap time for me.
It's not a turkey, I'll say that. I don't think it's a side dish either. Tell us, what is your side dish to go alongside that marquee matchup on Thursday?
Okay, first, what is your favorite side dish?
I am a massive mashed potatoes gal, which has become highly controversial on Helmets and Heels because once upon a time, our good friend Cole Thompson of SEC Unfiltered came on my radio program in August and informed us that his comparison for Graham Mertz, once upon a time the quarterback of the Florida Gators, is that he's mashed potatoes. There's just nothing special there. It's good when it complements something else. If you put a lot of butter on it, it actually could be kind of tasty, but otherwise it's just mashed potatoes. It's kind of there, which I disagree because I love mashed potatoes. I also have started to really get into sweet potato. I'm going to be making a sweet potato casserole for the first time this Thanksgiving. And so that's why I want to make sure when we look at side dish for this week's menu, we differentiate what side it is because there's a difference between potatoes and the green bean casserole, which I've been told by more than one person, that side dish is just kind of there and you're just kind of looking at it. We also, when we did this on Helmets and Heels, we had dinner rolls, which I think dinner rolls are redundant when you have great potato side dishes. So it's just kind of there aesthetically pleasing. And so we made our dinner rolls on Friday. We called the RSM Classic locally here in Southeast Georgia, the golf event. They're the dinner rolls. They're just kind of there on your weekend menu. What side dish is this matchup?
Well, my favorite side dish is, you read my mind, it's sweet potato casserole. So this is a sweet potato casserole. This is a little sweet, it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? It can be savory, and it can be sweet. Yes, you got it. So this is number 10 Maryland facing George Mason, which is an undefeated A-10 team. Pretty good team in a pretty good league in Annapolis. This is at the Navy Classic, so they're playing at the Naval Academy, which is a cool venue. This is Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus. This is not a dinner roll. A dinner roll is more of like an accessory than like a proper side, I feel like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is our sweet potato casserole.
It could be a meal if you really wanted it to be.
It could be. I've had a big serving of sweet potato casserole left over as a meal before. Definitely done that more than once. I was going to recommend that our listeners check out Kentucky versus Illinois on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. However, that game is on something called Baller TV. I don't know if you're familiar with Baller TV.
I've heard of Flow Sports. I haven't heard of Baller TV.
Okay, so Baller TV costs $30 a month, and so I'm not going to ask our listeners to pay for that. But instead, if you have cable on the same night, you can watch Seton Hall versus USC for free because it's on True TV. And if it's anything like college football and some other games that Turner has had, that game should be available via streaming on Max too. But Seton Hall's a decent team at 4-1, and their lone loss coming to Princeton. I'm looking to see in this game how forcefully USC can bounce back from that loss to Notre Dame. But yeah, if this was another side, maybe this is our mashed potatoes, another pretty good side that we have.
Double potatoes, double the carbs.
For sure. I have a quick rant about this. Just, one of the ways that women's college basketball will continue to grow is by getting people to watch on TV, right?
Oh, yes. Lean into this one, Mitch. I've been waiting for this. I hate that it took us 39 minutes to get here.
And when we get people to watch on TV, when we have really good games, like Kentucky versus Illinois is one of those games. It's ranked on ranked. It's two interesting teams. I want head coaches and assistant coaches and people working as general managers and director of basketball operations for these teams to take this into account. Whoever in your program is in charge of scheduling these multi-team events, when you talk to the folks running the MTE, can you ask them, hey, who is our broadcast partner? Where can our fans and the majority of media folks covering women's college basketball who cannot afford to travel to the Bahamas or wherever watch these games? And if the answer is Flow Hoops or Baller TV or some other bullshit streaming service that costs $30 a month, I need y'all to say, no, we're better than this. We are not playing in this event until you have a legitimate broadcast partner. Have some pride in your program and also take into account your part in helping grow the sport of women's college basketball. When I'm with my family around Thanksgiving, it's already a hurdle to seize the controller and get the remote and convince people in the room, hey, we should watch this women's college basketball game. If that game is on Fox or ESPN or even True TV or Paramount Plus or the CW, that's something I can find relatively easily and quickly. If I have to spend 20 minutes trying to figure out how to get Flow Hoops or Baller TV on and then pay for it on top of that, I've lost the battle. They've moved on. They're watching football. They're watching the news. They're watching something else. And so I and a whole lot of other people out there would love to watch Kentucky versus Illinois on Wednesday or Notre Dame versus TCU on Black Friday. But the reality is,
wait, where's Notre Dame TCU? Where are they broadcasting it?
It's on either Flow or Baller TV. I can't remember which one.
This is literally a team that just picked up a top 5 victory that Mitch put at number 1 in his AP poll ballot. And a TCU team that has Haley Van Lith, who we'll get to during last call, who is playing back to looking like Haley Van Lith, and a TCU team that also is in the top 25.
Yeah, it's on Flow Sports.
Oh, fun, great. Can I take this a step further, Mitch?
Sure.
Why do we have the number 6 team in America with 2 of the most exciting players in America playing the number 3 team in America who has a player who is, if nothing else, the most marketed in the country throughout the sport, playing at 4:00 during a college football Saturday? Let me take it one step further. Why do we have the number 1 team in America with the team that is the most marketed of any women's basketball outfit facing another top 5 team that has a player who quite literally has not only an ESPN series about her life from behind the scenes, but also, last time I checked, is from a pretty highly influential family in DC? Why is that team playing at 4:00 against the National Football League?
Yeah, make it make sense. I don't.
Those 2 games were on major networks, so we will give them that. They did put those 2 games on FS1, ESPN, fine, CBS, CSB. But why? Why, when we get the network right, we can't get the timing and the day of the game right?
Yeah. I just want, you, the decision makers, the folks in charge of the MTEs, don't put it on a platform that is inaccessible to most of the average Americans. And you, the folks on the coaching staffs, don't let this happen. Be better. Have some pride in your program, be invested in the growth of the sport, and demand that your games be on better platforms. You do this when it comes to the conference season, because when we get into conference play, I can easily find all your games on ESPN Plus or Fox or whatever it is. But when it comes to these MTEs, these are big games. These games matter. At least put them somewhere where people can watch. ESPN
it's bad for recruiting, quite frankly, if nothing else.
ESPN Plus is the bare minimum. Most people who I think are avid sports fans have that. It's also not that expensive when you compare it to Flow Hoops and whatever Baller TV is. So I want coaches to just hear me out on that. Take into account where your games are being shown. Yeah, like you mentioned, it's bad for recruiting. It's also bad for media folks like us. You can't yell at me for not ranking you high when I didn't watch your game because I couldn't watch your game. So do better. That's it. That's my
all
rant.
I know is if the concern is, well, if we put it on ESPN Plus, who's going to call the game from the Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas? Mitch and I volunteer as tribute.
Sure.
We will gladly come provide play-by-play, color
for
commentary,
all the games.
sideline. We'll do the whole battle for Atlantis.
Yeah.
A-okay. Don't you worry. We'll do it for free. just comp that hotel room.
Yeah, 4 games in one day. Let's do it. We can do that. Yeah.
Chris Hassel apparently got a call last Wednesday or Thursday. There was a CBS all company email sent out that basically said, hey, we forgot to staff Rick Pitino's 11 a.m. game against Georgia in the 7th place game at Baha Mar. Who wants to go to Baha Mar by Friday? And Chris said, yes, I will fly to Baha Mar to call a Rick Pitino game. Same with us. Just compensate the room. We'll be good to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's round out our weekend menu guide, our Thanksgiving edition of Chef's Table with this week's pie.
Yeah, so instead of Kentucky, Illinois, the pie, and while I like sweet potato pie, I've already chosen sweet potato casserole as the side. So as the pie, I'm going with pecan pie. What's your favorite pie, real quick?
I've become more of a pecan pie gal since I moved to the South, I think just because it's more readily available, but I'm an OG pumpkin stan. I also only eat 3 types of fruit, although I will eat apple cobbler pie, even though I only eat green apples. I'm a weirdo. I'm glad that I took you all behind the curtain on this journey. But yeah, pumpkin or pecan would be my preference.
Those are solid choices. Really, it's hard to go wrong with pie. So we have number 24 Louisville at Colorado. Colorado's pretty solid this year. This is Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you just want to skip your sides and not watch that Maryland game and go straight for the pie, you can do this because this is on ESPN Plus as well. Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Colorado 5-1 this year, I believe. And Louisville back on track after losing that game to Kentucky.
And again, that game is on ESPN Plus, so no excuses, folks. Unlike several of the games that we understand if you're not able to watch them, but you still can make money with Mitch off of these games. Lead us off, Mitch, with, dare I say it, a top 20 showdown in the Cayman Islands that's on Flow Sports.
I can't believe this game is on, just not on something better than Flow Sports.
It's 2024. How are we still here?
Turner Sports, CW, whoever, if you're listening, I don't know how this works, but if you can just acquire the rights to some of these MTEs, that would be great. I'd love to see it. Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, super big matchup. Number 3 Notre Dame against number 17 TCU in the Cayman Islands. I'm using the Massey Sports ratings and their predictions to see what the line might be. If this line is Notre Dame by 9.5, I would pick TCU to cover for a couple reasons. Number 1, TCU is really good. Number 2, Sedona Prince, really good center. Notre Dame doesn't have a whole lot of depth in the front court right now, like I just talked about earlier. Leah Tu-Ging and Kate Koval did a good job against USC, but that was really a game where the guards just kind of stepped up and took over. If Sedona Prince can do what she did against NC State, against Notre Dame, this is going to be a really entertaining game that not a whole lot of people will watch because it's on Flow Sports. The other thing is Haley Van Lith, spent a couple years in the ACC and knows Notre Dame pretty well. So I think this is going to be a close one. So I would pick TCU to cover.
I love, and I was going to mention her during shout-outs, closeouts, last call. I'm going to bring it up here. Even my boyfriend, Kevin, who is a casual women's basketball fan, sent me the graphic from ESPNW about the reemergence of Haley Van Lith, not only as an elite college basketball player, but as a WNBA prospect. It's good for the sport. Ultimately, she was part of the 3x3 USA gold medal or Olympic team. She was part of that. She's part of that original recruiting class with Paige Beckers, with Caitlin Clark. They all played on Jeff Walls's U16 national team that competed over in Asia. She was part of that face of this is the next era of women's college basketball. And I went into detail on this last week. I firmly believe that Kim Mulkey tried to make Haley Van Lith Kim Mulkey in 2024, as in Kim, the point guard at Louisiana Tech once upon a time in the 80s. And not just because of the weird braid memes that people saw, just the style of trying to fit a square peg into a circle hole. It was difficult to watch. Haley Van Lith was very transparent after the Elite Eight loss to Iowa about the mental toll that last season took on her. Ultimately, she never fit in with that super team. Her going to TCU shocked a lot of people, but it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense with what we've seen through 6 games so far this season.
Yeah, it's awesome to see. I think, like you mentioned, her being on that 3-on-3 team, America knows who Haley Van Lith is,
It's
even
good for the
outside of
sport.
that.
We love a good star.
Yeah, even outside of that, has a bunch of social media followers. So they know who she is, and so for TCU to be good and for her to be on that team and for her to be thriving in the way she is and kind of back to how she was at Louisville, I think that's a great thing.
So we got the Horned Frogs plus 9.5 on Friday. On Saturday, you can make money with Mitch on Baller TV as well, folks.
Yeah, so this is Saturday, 5:45 p.m. Eastern on Baller TV. If you are a subscriber to that, I am not, but I will be paying attention through the box score at what goes on between Richmond and Oklahoma State in Daytona Beach. If Oklahoma State is favored by like 8 points, 7.5, according to the Massey ratings, I would pick Richmond to cover. Richmond is 6-0. They look like one of the best mid-major teams in the country. Oklahoma State is also undefeated. They're 5-0. But Richmond, they're the highest ranked mid-major team on the Her Hoop stats ratings right now. And they're playing pretty well. And I think this is going to be a competitive game down in Daytona Beach. I would pick the Spiders to cover.
Another team that we've already referenced in this program. It's your final money pick of the week. That being the Duke Blue Devils, who, of course, picked up a massive top 10 upset this past week. They're taking on another team we've already referenced, though, Mitch, if only subtly, the Columbia Lions. And you don't think Duke's going to be able to maybe necessarily replicate the dominating performance they had against Kansas State last week?
Yeah, so Duke is a 12.5 point favorite here. I'm not totally sold on Duke as a double-digit favorite in this game. So I would maybe take Columbia to cover if it comes out and this spread is like 12.5 or something bigger than that. But I do like the Blue Devils on the money line to win. I think this is a win for the Blue Devils. I think they're just playing really, really good basketball right now. We talked about their loss at Maryland a couple weeks ago where they missed a bunch of free throws and frankly just didn't play as good on defense as they can and have shown that they can in these past couple games. So check that game out. That's Sunday at noon on ACC Network, which if you have cable and you live in ACC country, you should be able to get.
Not even ACC Network Plus on the main, folks.
Yeah, not even ACC Net Extra. So check out the Blue Devils. Check out Toby Fournier. Check out Ashlyn Jackson, but also check out a fun and good Columbia team as well and see what kind of fight they can put up.
We love the Ivy League on the Women's Basketball Podcast. Last call for any shout-outs, closeouts from you, Mitch. I know I have a couple.
No real big shout outs for me. You can read my work at USA Today's For the Win, where I wrote about Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo and also write about college football and a bunch of other things. So check that out. And I'm on all the socials. You can find me. I'm not hard to find.
I'm scrolling through your Twitter timeline right now because I found this first shout out, although I don't know if it's much of a shout out, somewhere on your timeline. Can you walk me through exactly what happened with Syracuse coach Felicia Leggett-Jack after the Orange lost to Albany? Because I think the FCC will let us be with some of the language that was used in this presser.
Yeah, I've never seen Felicia Leggett-Jack do that in a press conference before. But she went on, if you think I went on a rant earlier in this podcast about Flow Hoops and Baller TV, she went on a real rant where I think what she was getting at was not like a national thing, but like a locally in Syracuse thing where she said nobody blankety blank effing cares about women's college basketball. Nobody cares about us. She was really fired up. And then she was also like tweeting through it after the fact. She was like replying to a couple of people who had shared, her comments, and then some Syracuse fans interjected. So she was like fully in on whatever was going on there. But it was very strange for sure.
And this is a Syracuse team that, yes, had just lost to Albany. They did have Deaisha Fair, one of the top 5 all-time scorers in women's basketball, literally less than a calendar year ago on their roster. I understand this is not the Syracuse team that made the national title game in 2016. I understand perhaps what Syracuse women's basketball is best known for is producing Breanna Stewart and then letting her walk across the state of New York to the state of Connecticut. That was always going to happen. Sorry. Ask anybody who, I mean, covered Kia Stokes in Iowa. I mean, go back to Nafisa Collier coming up in St. Louis, which is obviously a hotbed of hoops. We all knew where she was going, folks. Come on now. This is just the nature of things. It's very rare that you see the Caitlin Clarks of the world opt to stay home and build a powerhouse there. But yeah, I was surprised because, yes, maybe some of this is pushback on the post-Jim Boeheim era men's basketball squad up there in central New York. Maybe it's pushback with what Fran Brown is doing on the football side of things. I mean, he's cleaning up, and maybe she just feels like she's getting left behind, so she had to make a little bit of a scene.
Yeah, I just pulled up the press conference transcript, and yeah, it was pretty weird. She just kept saying, this is what I've been trying to tell our young people on this team. Nobody cares about our program. Nobody cares about women's basketball. It's not nobody's fault. And then she, kind of goes on and,
it's about a three graph response to one.
Yeah, trying to get our kids to understand we've got to be so locked into us that we don't see that the fan base is like 12 people here. And it should be noted, Felicia Leggett-Jack is a Syracuse alum, has her jersey hanging in the rafters, one of their best players ever. And so for her to like go off like this, I haven't looked up what Syracuse's attendance is recently, but these are some strong comments, and I kind of wonder like how that impacts any sort of fan turnout going forward. And
maybe it'll spike it.
Yeah, I don't know. I assume that's what she was trying to do. But it was I thought kind of weird to do it after you just lost to a mid-major team in Albany, who's like not all that great. So going to be an interesting season for Syracuse regardless, because this is a team that for the past 2 years, every offensive possession, Deasia Fair was touching the ball at some point, and most of them ended with her taking a shot. And a lot of times that worked out for them. They made the tournament last year, pressed UConn pretty well, but they don't have Deasia Fair this year. And so that is going to take some getting used to.
We want you to know, Felicia, we see you on the Women's Basketball Podcast. We do care about Syracuse women's basketball. That may have to be a bit moving forward, Mitch.
Absolutely.
A couple other shout outs from me. Shout out to Gino Auriemma for becoming the all-time winningest coach in women's college basketball, men's college basketball. That one goes without saying. More so, shout out to Chris Daly for sticking it out 40 years on the bench with Gino. And she got her due in the post-game presser as Paige Beckers and the UConn women's team sporting the Chris Daly blonde bob wigs in her honor. I'm not going to lie. I saw the image and I was very confused because for some of those girls, it looked like their natural hair. And maybe it's Paige's blonde. And I was like, wait, hold on. Like, I'm confused. Did they all get their hair cut or did they actually have wigs on? They were wigs. Nobody actually changed their hair. But shout out to Chris Daly. Shout out to Gino Auriemma.
Yeah, I just kept thinking about, I was at the game where Gino tied Tara Vanderveer for the record when they beat North Carolina out in Greensboro. And someone asked Courtney Banghart, after the game, just sort of about Gino's impact and stuff, and also about Chris Daly's impact and the fact that they've been coaching together now for 40 years. And she was like, some people don't stay married that long. So that's been a great partnership for women's college basketball and UConn. And the other thing that Banghart said that I remember, she was kind of just talking about Gino's impact on the sport. And, like 10 years ago when UConn was winning those 4 titles in a row with Stewie, we saw a lot of takes and columns about like how UConn is bad for women's college basketball.
Well, now South Carolina is bad for women's basketball. Oh, wait, now that's number 4, South Carolina.
Yeah. But what Courtney Banghart pointed out was like they saw other ADs in schools around the country saw what UConn was doing and was like, well, like, why can't we have that? And it was like, well, you need to do A, B, C, and D. And most of it involved money in terms of resources and coaching and sort of that thing. So I think UConn winning those 4 titles in a row and Gino's dominance just raised the bar and incentivized everyone else to invest in the sport. And now you have, now it's it's like a drought for UConn since they've won a national title. It's been since 2016. So yeah, we don't have this parity in the sport that we have now without Gino's dominance.
Last one from me. Shout out to Snoop Dogg. He seemingly is everywhere. Shout out the Olympics for that. Shout out NBC for giving him a platform with a voice. But that also included not on Peacock, not on NBC, not on Flow Sports or Baller TV either. Saturday's USC lost to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Snoop Dogg was in the house. Michael B. Jordan's in the house. We welcome all kinds, just like we care about Syracuse women's basketball. We care about Snoop Dogg. We care about the eyeballs. It's a sport that needs stars. It's why we love Haley Van Lith. Snoop, you're allowed in the studded lineup in women's basketball.
Yeah, I gotta say, we commiserated and like complained a lot about like the conference realignment stuff. The one like silver lining for women's college basketball, anyways, is Juju Watkins and USC. A lot of their games, because the Big Ten has the broadcast deal that they have, they're on Fox and FS1. Whereas like last year, I couldn't watch a lot of those games because they were stuck on the Pac-12 networks, and I don't get that. So
no one gets it. It doesn't exist anymore, and for good reason.
So RIP to the Pac-12 networks, but this is a good thing out of conference realignment.
Yes, more national games, more big time